The beautiful, wealthy heiress falls in love with a poor black worker. When her father finds out, he says, "Daughter, you cannot marry this poor black man. We are rich." The Boston sky was orange and pink, casting long shadows over the imposing facade of the Harrington factory. Emily Harrington, the 25-year-old heiress to the family fortune, watched the workers go about their business through the window of her limousine, feeling a familiar knot forming in her stomach. The company's annual charity event, organized by her mother, was about to begin, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was an intruder in her own world. Adjusting the navy blue silk dress that hugged her delicate curves, Emily took a deep breath, rehearsing the smile she had perfected over the years. It was the smile of the perfect heiress, the obedient daughter, the future business leader. But behind that rehearsed smile, there was a young woman struggling to find her place in a world that seemed to have been chosen for her, not by her. "Miss Harrington, we're here," announced the driver, opening the door of the limousine. Emily stepped gracefully out of the vehicle, her high heels echoing on the asphalt. The air was charged with the smell of metal and machine oil, a strangely comforting fragrance that made her feel closer to reality than the expensive perfumes that usually surrounded her. "Emily, darling, you finally arrived," the shrill voice of her mother, Victoria Harrington, cut through the air. The matriarch of the family, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, approached with open arms. "Everyone is waiting for you. Your father will be giving the opening speech soon." Emily hugged her mother briefly, smelling the familiar scent of roses that always accompanied her. "Sorry I'm late, Mom. The traffic was terrible," Victoria waved dismissively. "It doesn't matter, you're here now. Come on, the guests are looking forward to seeing you." As she was guided inside the factory, Emily couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the guests in their gala outfits and the workers who continued their work, casting curious glances at the passing entourage. It was as if two worlds coexisted in the same space, separated by an invisible but palpable barrier. The main hall of the factory had been transformed into an elegant event space. Tables covered with white linen tablecloths were arranged around a makeshift stage where a string quartet played softly. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and canapes, while the guests, a mixture of executives, politicians, and local celebrities, chatted animatedly. Emily took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and took a sip, hoping the alcohol would calm her nerves. She smiled and waved at familiar faces, exchanging superficial greetings and empty compliments. Each interaction seemed to drain a little more of her energy, making her feel like an actress in a play of which she didn't know the script. Then she saw him. Amidst the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses, one man stood out. He wore blue work overalls, the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular arms marked by years of hard work. His dark hair was messy, as if he had just run his hands through it, and there was a smudge of grease on his cheek. But what really captured Emily's attention were his eyes, a deep, intense blue that seemed to glow with an inner light. He was talking to a group of workers near one of the machines, gesticulating animatedly. Emily couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see the respect and admiration in his colleagues' eyes. There was something magnetic about his presence, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the falseness that surrounded him. Without realizing it, Emily began to move towards him, as if pulled by an invisible force. She was only a few steps away when her father, Charles Harrington, suddenly appeared in front of her. "Emily, my dear, where have you been? I need you to meet Senator Thompson. He's very interested in hearing about your plans for the future of the company," said Charles, his tone making it clear that it wasn't a request, but an order. Emily hesitated, casting one last glance at the mysterious man. To her surprise, he was looking directly at her, a small smile playing on his lips. Her heart leapt, and she felt a blush creep up her neck. "Emily?" Her father's voice brought her back to reality. "Yes, Dad." "Of course," she answered automatically, allowing herself to be led away. The next few hours passed in a blur of forced conversations and rehearsed smiles. Emily played the part of the perfect heiress, discussing business strategies and future plans with a confidence she didn't feel. But her mind kept returning to the blue-eyed man, wondering who he was and why his mere presence affected her so much. When she finally got a moment to herself, Emily slipped away to a quiet corner of the hall. She watched the crowd, feeling more alone than ever in the midst of so many people. It was then that she heard a deep, melodious voice behind her. "You don't look very comfortable here, do you?" Emily turned around in surprise and found herself face to face with the man who had captured her attention earlier. Up close, he was even more impressive. His blue eyes had a twinkle of amusement, and there was something about his smile that made her want to smile back. No, not really," she admitted, surprised at her own honesty. He held out his hand. Jake Collins, assembly line worker, and apparently intruder at fancy parties." Emily laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "Emily Harrington, reluctant heiress and apparently a terrible hostess." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Harrington, as in Harrington Industries?" Emily nodded, expecting to see the familiar flash of recognition and lust in his eyes. But to her surprise, Jake just smiled. "Well, that explains the $1,000 dress. It must be hard working on the assembly line in that." Emily couldn't help but laugh. "You'd be surprised at my dexterity with a wrench." Jake tilted his head, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Oh, really? Maybe you can give me a few pointers then. I've always wanted to learn how to fix machines wearing Louboutin heels." For a moment, Emily forgot where she was. She forgot the expectations, the judgmental looks, the weight of the Harrington name. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Free. "Actually," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret, "I've never even been on the assembly line. This is the first time I've been in the factory." Jake looked genuinely surprised. "Really? But I thought you were the heiress." Emily sighed, the mask of perfection slipping for a moment. "I am, but that doesn't mean I really know the business. Not really. Not like you do." Jake studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You don't seem very happy about it." "Is it that obvious?" Emily asked, feeling vulnerable in a way she usually avoided. Jake shrugged. "Maybe not to everyone, but I've always been good at reading people. It's a useful skill when you work with machines all day. Sometimes it's easier to understand the mechanisms than the people." Emily felt an inexplicable connection with this man she barely knew. There was an honesty in his words, an authenticity that drew her like a moth to a flame. "Jake!" a voice called out from across the hall. "We need you here." Jake grimaced comically. "Duty calls. Apparently not even at a gala party do the machines give us a break." He turned to go but stopped, glancing back at Emily. "Hey, if you want to see what the factory is really like, away from all the glitter, I could show you sometime. No Louboutin heels, I promise." Emily felt her heart race. I'd like that." Jake smiled, a smile that lit up his whole face. "Then it's a date, Ms. Harrington." As she watched him walk away, Emily felt something awaken inside her. A curiosity, a desire to see beyond the golden walls of her privileged world. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to finally find her place. That night, as the party continued around her, Emily Harrington made a silent promise to herself. She would find out who she really was, beyond her name and fortune. And somehow, she knew that Jake Collins would be an important part of that journey. The days following the charity event passed like a blur for Emily Harrington. Her social and business obligations remained the same, but something had changed inside her. The memory of Jake's blue eyes and genuine smile haunted her, awakening a sense of unease she had never experienced before. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, while Emily was attending yet another tedious meeting on financial projections, that her phone vibrated discreetly. A message from an unknown number flashed up on the screen. "Still interested in that factory tour? No heels this time. Jake." Emily's heart leapt. She looked around the meeting room, where middle-aged executives were discussing graphs and spreadsheets, completely oblivious to the revolution taking place inside her. With trembling fingers, she replied, "Absolutely. When and where?" The answer came almost instantly. "Today, 6 p.m., back gate of the factory. Come prepared to get a little dirty." Emily could barely contain a smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than the boredom and apathy that had become her constant companion. At 5:55 p.m., Emily parked her discreet car, not the limousine this time, a block from the factory. Dressed in jeans, a simple t-shirt and sneakers, she felt strangely exposed and at the same time more herself than she had ever felt before. Jake was waiting for her at the gate, his broad smile lighting up his face when he saw her approach. "I thought you might give up," he joked. Emily raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on her lips. "And missed the chance to see what really goes on behind the curtains?" "Never." Jake laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made Emily's heart race. "Well then, Ms. Harrington, get ready for a trip into the heart of Harrington Industries." The next few hours were a revelation for Emily. Jake guided her through the corridors of the factory, explaining each process, introducing her to the night shift workers, showing her the workings of machines she only knew from reports and spreadsheets. Emily absorbed everything with a voracious curiosity. She asked questions, touched the machines, watched the workers with a new respect, and with each passing moment, she became more aware of Jake's presence at her side. The warmth of his body when he leaned over to explain something, the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about his work, the way his hand occasionally brushed hers, sending shivers down her spine. "And here," said Jake, leading her into a small room at the back of the factory, "is where the magic really happens." The room was simple, a few tables, scattered tools, blueprints and diagrams covering the walls, but there was an energy in the air, a sense of possibility that Emily had never felt in the luxurious offices on the executive floor. "This is the innovation room," Jake explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "This is where we workers get together to discuss ideas, solve problems, think of ways to improve processes." Emily looked around in amazement. "I didn't know that existed." Jake watched her for a moment, his expression softening. "There's a lot going on here that the executives don't know about, Emily. The workers. We're the heart of this factory. We know it better than anyone." Their gazes met, and for a moment the world seemed to disappear around them. Emily felt her heart racing, aware of Jake's closeness, the warmth of his body, the intensity of his eyes. "Jake, she began, but was interrupted by the shrill sound of an alarm. Jake cursed softly. "Damn, it's the maintenance alarm, I need to check." Emily followed him as he ran into the production area. One of the machines had stopped, and a group of workers were gathered around it, arguing animatedly. Jake plunged into the confusion, his deft hands working on the machine as he exchanged quick information with his colleagues. Emily watched, fascinated, as he diagnosed the problem, proposed solutions, led the team with a natural confidence she had never seen in her company's executives. After almost an hour of intense work, the machine came back to life with a satisfying roar. The workers celebrated, patting each other on the back and thanking Jake. When they finally had a moment alone, Emily couldn't contain her admiration. "That was incredible, Jake. The way you handled everything, how everyone trusted you." Jake shrugged, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "It's just part of the job. Everyone here would do the same." "No, it's not just part of the job," Emily insisted. "It's passion, it's dedication, it's real leadership." Jake studied her for a moment, his expression serious. "Emily, why are you really here? What do you hope to get out of it?" The question took her by surprise. Emily hesitated, searching for the right words. I want to understand. I want to know how things really work here. I want to make a difference, Jake. Not just be a name in an office upstairs." Jake took a step towards her, reducing the distance between them. "What if what you find out isn't what you expect? What if there are things going on here that go against everything you thought you knew about your company?" Emily swallowed, feeling the weight of Jake's words. "Then I want to know. I need to know. I can't go on living in a bubble, Jake. Not after seeing all this." Their gazes met again, and this time there were no alarms to interrupt them. Jake hesitantly raised his hand and gently touched Emily's face. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Emily," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion, and then their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if they were both testing uncharted waters. But it soon deepened, becoming more urgent, more passionate. Emily clung to Jake, feeling the strength of his arms around her, the warmth of his body against hers. When they finally broke apart, they were both panting. Emily looked at Jake, seeing in him a reflection of the storm of emotions she felt inside. "That complicates things," said Jake, his forehead resting against hers. Emily laughed softly. "Things were already complicated, Jake. This just makes them more interesting." He smiled, that smile that made Emily's heart melt. "You're full of surprises, Miss Harrington." "Emily," she corrected softly. "Just Emily." They spent the rest of the evening exploring the factory, talking, laughing, stealing kisses in the dark corners between the machines. Emily felt alive in a way she had never experienced before. It was as if a whole world of possibilities had opened up before her. When the time finally came to leave, Emily found herself reluctant to let go. Standing at the gate where they had met hours before, she and Jake looked at each other, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. "This can't just be a one-night thing, Jake," said Emily, her voice charged with emotion. "I want to see more, learn more, about the factory, about the workers, about you." Jake nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and concern. "It's dangerous, Emily. There are things going on here that, well, that could cause problems for both of us if they were discovered." Emily felt a shiver of excitement and fear run down her spine. "I don't mind the danger. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters." Jake pulled her in for another kiss, this one full of promise and possibility. "All right then," he murmured against her lips. "Let's see where it takes us." As Emily drove home that night, her heart was filled with a mixture of emotions: excitement, fear, hope, and something else, something she wasn't yet ready to name. But she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. What she didn't know was that, while she was dreaming about the possibilities of her future with Jake, her best friend, Sarah, was about to make a discovery that would shake the foundations of everything Emily thought she knew about her family and her company. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Emily's bedroom, finding her already awake, staring at the ceiling with a dreamy smile on her lips. The memories of the night before with Jake still danced in her mind, every touch, every kiss, every whispered word full of promise and possibility. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table, bringing her back to reality. It was a message from her mother. "Family meeting for breakfast. Your father has an important announcement." Emily sighed, feeling the weight of her family responsibilities bearing down on her again. But this time, there was something different. A spark of determination shone in her eyes as she got up to face the day. In the dining room of the Harrington mansion, the tension was palpable. Charles Harrington, patriarch of the family and CEO of Harrington Industries, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of seriousness. Victoria, Emily's mother, took her usual place to her husband's right, her hands restlessly arranging and rearranging the perfectly aligned cutlery. Emily entered the room, greeting her parents with a quick kiss before sitting down. "Good morning, what's the big news?" Charles snorted, straightening up in his chair. "Emily, as you know, Harrington Industries is going through a crucial period. We're about to close a merger deal with Miller Corp that could double the value of our shares." Emily nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral as her mind raced. Miller Corp was known for its aggressive business practices and its lack of concern for workers' welfare. "To solidify this merger," Charles continued, "we need to show a united front, a strong family committed to the future of the company." Victoria took Emily's hand, her touch cold and formal. "Darling, the son of Miller Corp's CEO, Jonathan, has expressed an interest in you. We think a marriage between the two of you would be beneficial for everyone involved." Emily's world seemed to freeze. "Marriage?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want me to marry for business?" Charles frowned. "Don't be melodramatic, Emily. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jonathan is a good catch, intelligent, successful, from a good family. Many women would kill to be in his position." Emily felt a wave of anger rising up inside her. And what do I want? Doesn't it matter? Victoria sighed, her voice taking on that condescending tone that Emily hated so much. Darling, sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Your grandmother did the same when she married your grandfather, and look where we are now. Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. I'm not Grandma, and we don't live in those times anymore. I'm not going to marry someone I hardly know just to close a deal. Charles slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes clink. Emily Harrington, sit down immediately. You have responsibilities to this family and this company. You can't just ignore them because of some teenage whim. Teenage whim, Emily repeated, incredulous. Dad, I'm 25 years old. I'm a grown woman, capable of making my own decisions. Then start acting like one, thundered Charles. Do you think you can go on living this life of luxury without taking responsibility? The world doesn't work like that, Emily. Emily felt tears of frustration stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Maybe I don't want this life of luxury anymore. Maybe I want something more, something real. Victoria gasped, bringing her hand to her chest, as if she had been physically wounded. Emily, how can you say such a thing after everything we've done for you? What have you done for me? Emily retorted, her voice shaking with emotion. You raised me in a bubble, groomed me to be the perfect heiress, but you never asked me what I really wanted. Charles stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Emily. Enough! You're meeting Jonathan this weekend, and you're going to behave like a Harrington. Do you understand me? For a moment, Emily felt the old instinct to obey, to bow to her father's will. But then the image of Jake popped into her mind, his gentle smile, his honest eyes, the way he made her feel alive and real. No, she said, her voice low but firm. What? Charles asked, clearly not used to being challenged. Emily straightened her shoulders, meeting her father's gaze. I said no. I'm not meeting Jonathan. I'm not getting married for convenience. And I'm not going to let you dictate my life any longer. With that, she turned and left the room, ignoring her mother's calls and her father's threats. Her heart was pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and exultation coursing through her veins. In her room, Emily picked up her phone with trembling hands, dialing Jake's number. Emily? His voice sounded worried on the other end of the line. Is everything all right? Jake, she breathed, feeling instantly calmer just hearing his voice. We need to talk. Can we meet? Half an hour later, Emily was sitting on a park bench watching the children play in the nearby playground. Jake arrived, his face a mask of worry. What happened? He asked, taking a seat next to her. Emily told him about the family meeting, about the merger agreement, about the expectation of marriage. As she spoke, she watched Jake's face, seeing the anger and indignation growing in his eyes. This is crazy, he said, when she had finished. They can't force you to get married. Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. They could make my life very difficult if I don't cooperate. Jake, I don't know what to do. Jake was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of a determination that Emily had never heard before. Emily, there's something you need to know. Something about Harrington Industries and about Miller Corp. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. What do you mean? Jake hesitated, clearly struggling with his words. Over the last few months, some of us at the plant have noticed irregularities, questionable practices, and with this merger, well, things could get a lot worse. Emily felt her world spin. What kind of irregularities? Safety cuts, unpaid overtime, unfair dismissals, Jake listed, his voice low but intense. And there are rumors that Miller Corp is involved in even darker practices, child labor in its factories abroad, bribery of officials. Emily closed her eyes, feeling nauseous. My God, Jake, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Jake took her hand, squeezing it gently. I know you didn't know, Emily. That's why I'm telling you now. You have the power to do something about it. Emily looked at him, seeing the confidence in his eyes. How? Jake, you're Emily Harrington, Jake interrupted her, his voice firm. "Heiress to Harrington Industries. You have a voice, Emily. You have influence. You can make a difference." Emily felt something awaken inside her, a mixture of fear and determination. "This is going to be dangerous, isn't it?" Jake nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, for both of us. But Emily, if we do nothing, how many lives will be affected? How many families will suffer?" Emily thought of the factory workers, of their families. She thought of Jake, of his passion and dedication, and she thought of herself, of the woman she wanted to be. "Okay," she finally said, her voice firm. "Let's do this. Let's expose the truth." Jake pulled her into a tight embrace, his lips meeting hers in a passionate kiss. When they broke apart, they were both panting, their eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. "It's not going to be easy," Jake warned. Emily smiled, feeling stronger and more determined than ever. "Nothing worthwhile is easy, Jake. But together we can do it." As the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows over the park, Emily and Jake sat, hands intertwined, making plans for a future that was uncertain, but full of possibilities. What they didn't know was that, at that very moment, forces were moving against them. At the Harrington mansion, Charles was making a phone call, his voice low and threatening. "Yes, I need you to investigate someone for me. A factory worker. Jake Collins." And in a cafe on the other side of town, Sarah, Emily's best friend, stared at her laptop, her eyes wide with shock as she read documents she should never have seen, documents that could change everything. The battle had only just begun. Sarah Jensen had always prided herself on her keen intuition. As an investigative journalist, she had developed a sixth sense for stories that deserved to be told. But nothing in her career had prepared her for what she was about to discover about Harrington Industries and her best friend, Emily. The cafe was almost empty at that time of night, the barista casting irritated glances in the direction of Sarah, who was sitting in a corner, surrounded by papers, and with her laptop open in front of her. She barely noticed the time passing, her eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing every word of the documents an anonymous informant had sent her. "My God," she muttered, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "This can't be true." But the more she read, the clearer it became that the documents were authentic. Fabricated financial reports, secret deals with low-cost suppliers with dubious reputations, internal emails discussing how to get around environmental and labor regulations. Harrington Industries, the company that Sarah had always seen as a model of corporate success, was involved in deeply unethical and, in some cases, illegal practices. And at the center of it all was Charles Harrington, Emily's father. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. How could she tell Emily this? How could she expose the truth without destroying her best friend's life? Her phone vibrated, making her jump. It was a message from Emily. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Sarah looked at the message, her heart heavy. "Of course," she replied. "Breakfast at our usual place?" Emily's reply came almost instantly. "Perfect. At 8 a.m. I have a lot to tell you." Sarah sighed, looking again at the documents on her laptop. "Me too, Emily," she murmured. "Me too." The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the small cafe where she and Emily had met since college. She chose a table at the back, away from prying ears, and ordered a strong coffee. She had been up all night struggling between her duty as a journalist and her loyalty as a friend. Emily arrived punctually at 8 a.m., looking both anxious and determined. She hugged Sarah tightly before sitting down. "Sarah, you won't believe what's happened," Emily began, her words coming out in a rapid, agitated stream. For almost half an hour, Emily talked non-stop, telling her about Jake, about the night at the factory, about the family reunion and the pressure to marry Jonathan Miller. Sarah listened intently, her heart squeezing tighter and tighter as the story unfolded. "And now Jake and I are determined to expose the truth," Emily concluded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Sarah, I know it's dangerous, but it's the right thing to do. Will you help me?" Sarah felt as if the world was spinning around her. She looked at her best friend, seeing the hope and trust in her eyes, and knew that she could no longer put off the inevitable. "Emily," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something you need to see." With hesitant hands, Sarah opened her laptop and turned it towards Emily. "Last night, I received these documents from an anonymous source. They're about Harrington Industries." Emily frowned, leaning over to look at the screen. Sarah watched her friend's face as she read, seeing confusion give way to shock and, finally, horror. "No," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "That can't... My father wouldn't." But as she continued to read, the denial in her voice was replaced by a growing anger. How could he? How could they do this? Sarah placed a comforting hand over Emily's. "I'm sorry, Em. I wish I had an easier way of telling you this." Emily looked up from her laptop, her face a mask of determination. "No, Sarah. You did the right thing. That changes everything." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. Emily took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "What I said I would do. Expose the truth. Only now, we have a lot more to reveal than I imagined." Sarah felt a surge of pride for her friend, but also a shiver of fear. "Emily, do you understand what this means? This isn't just about the merger with Miller Corp or questionable labor practices. This is corporate fraud on a massive scale. Your father could go to prison." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, the pain evident on her face. When she opened them again, there was a steely resolve in her gaze. "I know, and as much as it hurts me, I can't let it continue. I can't be complicit in it." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of admiration and concern for her friend. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Emily thought for a moment. "We need more evidence, internal documents, employee testimonies. We need to build a solid case before we go public." "I can help with that," Sarah offered. "I have contacts, sources who can give us more information." Emily smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." "What about Jake?" Sarah asked, a note of caution in her voice. "Do you trust him completely?" Emily hesitated for a moment, remembering the moments she had shared with Jake, the honesty in his eyes, the passion in his voice when he talked about justice. "Yes," she finally said. "I trust him. He was the one who opened my eyes to what was happening in the factory in the first place." Sarah nodded, respecting her friend's decision. "Okay, so let's bring him into our little conspiracy group. The more allies we have, the better." The two friends spent the next few hours drawing up plans, discussing strategies, preparing for the battle to come. They knew they were entering dangerous territory, challenging one of the most powerful corporations in the country and exposing secrets that many would prefer to keep buried. Meanwhile, in his office at Harrington Industries, Charles Harrington was receiving a report on Jake Collins. His eyes narrowed as he read the information, a cold smile forming on his lips. "So," he muttered, "it seems our Mr. Collins has a few secrets of his own. This could be useful." Charles picked up the phone, dialing a number that few knew. "I need you to take care of a problem for me," he said when the call was answered. "It's time to show Mr. Collins exactly who he's messing with." Back at the cafe, Emily and Sarah were finalizing their plans, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. "We're actually doing this," Emily said, a mixture of fear and excitement in her voice. Sarah squeezed her friend's hand. "We are. And we're going to do the right thing, Emily, no matter what." The two friends hugged, feeling the weight of the responsibility they had taken on. They knew that the days ahead would be difficult, that they would face obstacles and dangers they could barely imagine, but they also knew that they were on the right side of history. As they left the cafe, ready to face whatever the future held, Emily felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from Jake. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Emily showed the message to Sarah, a knot forming in her stomach. "What do you think happened?" Sarah frowned, concern evident in her eyes. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll face it together. Remember, Emily, you're not alone in this." Emily nodded, grateful for her friend's strength and support. Together, they walked into the unknown, ready to fight for the truth, for justice and for the future they believed was possible. The game had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows over the parking lot of the Harrington factory when Emily arrived, her heart beating frantically in her chest. Jake's urgent message had made her anxious, and Sarah's recent revelations still echoed in her mind, a cacophony of painful truths and crushing responsibilities. She spotted Jake by the back gate, his posture tense, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. When he turned to face her, Emily saw a mixture of emotions in his eyes: fear, anger, and something that looked terribly like guilt. "Jake," she called softly, stepping closer. "What happened?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that Emily had learned to recognize. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you before, but I was afraid." Emily felt a knot forming in her stomach. "What are you talking about, Jake?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "Remember when we first met? At the charity event?" Emily nodded, confused by the change of subject. "I wasn't there by chance," Jake confessed, his voice low and laden with remorse. "I was sent by a group of activists who have been monitoring Harrington Industries' practices for months." Emily took a step back, feeling as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "What? Did you use me?" Jake reached out to her, but Emily pulled away. "No, Emily, it wasn't like that. Yes, at first I had a mission, but everything changed when I met you. My feelings for you are real." Emily closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jake sighed heavily. "Because things are getting dangerous. The group, they want to act now, expose everything at once. But I told them we needed more time, that you were on our side, that we could do this the right way." Emily opened her eyes, staring at Jake with a mixture of hurt and determination. "And what did they say?" "They didn't like it," Jake admitted. "Emily, they threatened to go ahead without us, expose everything, including my involvement with you." Emily felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. "So that's it? You're here to warn me? To save your own ass?" "No," Jake exclaimed, taking a step towards her. "I'm here because I can't lie to you anymore. Because, despite how it all started, what I feel for you is real. And because I believe that together we can do the right thing in the right way." Emily was about to reply when she heard voices approaching. Turning around, she saw a group of factory workers approaching, their expressions varying between curiosity and hostility. "So it's true," said one of them, an older man who Emily recognized as one of the supervisors. "Little Princess Harrington is fraternizing with the enemy." Jake stepped forward, putting himself between Emily and the group. "It's not what you think, guys. Emily's on our side." "On our side?" sneered another worker. "She's a Harrington. Her father is responsible for everything wrong in this factory." Emily felt a wave of indignation rise in her throat. "I'm not my father," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And I'm here because I want to make a difference. I want to right the wrongs that have been done." The group exchanged skeptical glances. The older supervisor stepped forward. "Nice words, miss. But words don't pay our bills. They don't protect our families." "I know," Emily replied, feeling the weight of her responsibility. "That's why I need your help, to expose the truth, to make the necessary changes." A murmur ran through the group. Jake took advantage of the moment of hesitation to address his colleagues. "Guys, I know it's hard to trust, but I know Emily. She means what she says. With her on our side, we have a real chance of making a difference." The group seemed divided. Some still looked on suspiciously, but others seemed to consider Jake and Emily's words. It was at that moment that Sarah arrived, panting and wide-eyed with worry. "Emily, Jake, we've got a problem." Everyone turned to face the newcomer. Emily felt her heart racing, dreading what was to come next. Sarah glanced nervously at the group of workers before turning to Emily and Jake. "I just got a tip from an inside source. The board of Harrington Industries is holding an emergency meeting. They know, Emily. They know about you two, about our investigation, about everything." A heavy silence fell over the group. Emily felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. Jake put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of silent support. "What do we do now?" someone from the group of workers asked, the previous hostility giving way to a shared concern. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's expectations on her. This was the moment, she realized, the moment to prove that she was more than just the Harrington name, more than the reluctant heiress. It was the moment to lead. "Now," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "we fight, not just for us, but for everyone who has been harmed by the practices of Harrington Industries. We can't wait any longer, we have to act." Jake nodded, a proud smile on his lips. "I'm with you, Emily, all the way." Sarah stepped forward. "So am I. I've got all the documents ready. We can go public at any time." The older supervisor looked at Emily, his eyes assessing her carefully. After a moment, he held out his hand. "If you're really willing to face your own family for us, then you can count on us, Miss Harrington." Emily shook his hand, feeling a wave of emotion run through her body. "Thank you. And please, call me Emily." The group began to disperse, each with a task to complete. Emily turned to Jake and Sarah, her mind racing with possibilities and strategies. "We need to be quick and precise," she said. "Sarah, get everything ready to go public. Jake, gather all the workers who are willing to testify. I'm going to face my father." Jake pulled her into a tight hug. "Are you sure?" "I can go with you." Emily shook her head, gently pulling away. "No. This is something I need to do on my own." As she prepared to leave, Emily felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from her mother. "Come home immediately. Your father wants to talk to you." Emily showed the message to Jake and Sarah. "Looks like my dad's saving me the trip." Sarah squeezed Emily's hand. "Be careful. And remember, we're here if you need us." Jake kissed her softly. "You're stronger than them, Emily. Don't let them intimidate you." With one last look at her allies, Emily set off towards the Harrington mansion, her heart torn between fear of the imminent confrontation and the determination to do the right thing. As she drove, she couldn't help thinking about how her life had changed so dramatically in such a short space of time. Just a few weeks ago, she was the reluctant heiress, living a life of privilege without question. Now she was about to challenge everything her family stood for. On arriving at the mansion, Emily was greeted by an oppressive silence. The house, normally a symbol of power and wealth, now seemed cold and threatening. Her father was waiting for her in the study, an imposing figure behind the large mahogany desk. Her mother was sitting in an armchair in the corner, her face a mask of worry and disapproval. "Emily," Charles Harrington said, his voice cold as ice, "I think we have a lot to talk about." Emily straightened her shoulders, bracing herself for the battle to come. She knew that the next words she said could change the course of her life forever. "Yes, Dad," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I think we do." The confrontation that would follow would determine not only the future of Harrington Industries, but also the fate of Emily, Jake, and all those who had put their trust in them. The storm had arrived, and there was no turning back. Charles Harrington's office had always been a symbol of power and intimidation, but at that moment, as Emily faced her father across the imposing mahogany desk, she refused to be intimidated. The air was charged with tension, each breath seeming to echo in the oppressive silence. "So," Charles began, his voice cold and controlled, "you've decided to ally yourself with our enemies, to betray your own family." Emily stood her ground, her eyes fixed on her father's. "No, Dad. I've decided to ally myself with the truth, to justice." Charles laughed, a humorless sound that made Emily shudder internally. "Justice? Truth? What do you know about the real world, Emily? You've lived a sheltered life full of privilege, and now you think you can judge how we run this company?" "I know enough," Emily retorted, her voice gaining strength. "I know about the illegal practices, the dangerous working conditions, the exploitation of employees, and I can't stay silent any longer." Victoria, who had remained silent until then, let out an exasperated sigh. "Emily, darling, you're being naive. Sometimes certain concessions have to be made to keep a business running." Emily turned to her mother, disbelief in her eyes. Concessions? Is that what you call fraud and exploitation? Charles slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing around the room. Enough, Emily, you have no idea of the consequences of what you're about to do. Think of the people who depend on this company, the jobs that will be lost if you go ahead with this madness. For a moment, Emily hesitated. Her father's words had hit a nerve. She thought of all the families who depended on Harrington Industries, of how her actions could affect them. But then she remembered the faces of the factory workers, Jake, Sarah, everyone who trusted her to do the right thing. "No, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "It's those people I'm thinking of. They deserve better. They deserve a company that values them, that treats them with dignity." Charles stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Emily. "Do you really think you can change things? That you can take on the whole system?" Emily stood up too, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not alone in this fight, Dad. I have allies, people who believe in a better future." "Ah, yes, your new friends," Charles sneered. "The worker with a questionable past and the ambitious journalist. Nice allies you've made." Emily felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. "Don't talk about them like that. They have more integrity in their little finger than you have in your whole body." Charles's face contorted with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Emily. You don't know the sacrifices I've made to build this empire, to give you and your mother the life you have." "And at what cost, Charles?" Victoria interjected, her voice trembling. Emily turned, surprised to see tears in her mother's eyes. "Look at us. Look at our daughter. Is it worth losing all this?" For a moment, something seemed to waver in Charles's eyes, a shadow of doubt, perhaps even regret. But just as it came, it was gone, replaced by the usual cold determination. "You two don't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I can't just undo years of arrangements. There are powerful people involved, contracts, agreements. If I fall, many will fall with me." Emily took a step towards her father, holding out her hand. "Then let's fix this together, Dad. It's not too late to do the right thing." For a brief moment, Emily thought she saw a spark of consideration in her father's eyes. But then the phone on the table rang, breaking the moment. Charles answered, his expression hardening as he listened. "I understand. I'll be there immediately." He hung up, turning to Emily with a somber expression. "It seems your friends were quicker than we expected. The press are in front of the factory. It's time for you to choose a side, Emily, once and for all." Emily felt her heart racing. She hadn't expected things to move so quickly, but now there was no turning back. It was the moment of truth. "I've already chosen my side, Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I hope that one day you'll understand why." With that, she turned and left the office, ignoring her mother's calls. As she ran to her car, Emily dialed Jake's number. "Emily?" Jake's worried voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Is everything all right?" "Jake, meet me at the factory. Now," she said, starting the car. "Things are happening faster than we expected." 20 minutes later, Emily arrived at the Harrington factory. The parking lot was packed with press cars, reporters, and cameras everywhere. She spotted Jake and Sarah near the main gate, surrounded by a group of workers. On seeing her, Jake ran towards her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Are you all right? What happened to your dad?" Emily shook her head, gently pulling away. "There's no time to explain now. What's going on here?" Sarah approached, her face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "One of the workers leaked the story to the press. We couldn't control it. Emily, they want to hear from you. Everyone is waiting for a statement from the Harrington heiress." Emily felt the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. This was the moment. There was no turning back. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath to calm herself. "Let's do it." Jake took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're with you, Emily. All of us." Emily looked around, seeing the hopeful faces of the workers, the determination in Sarah's eyes, the love and support in Jake's gaze. She knew that what she was about to do would change everything, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly on the right track. With firm steps, Emily walked towards the crowd of reporters. The cameras turned towards her, flashes going off. microphones being pushed in her direction. "Ms. Harrington, Miss Harrington!" the reporters shouted, all wanting to be the first to get a statement. Emily raised her hands, asking for silence. Surprisingly, the crowd quietened down, all eyes fixed on her. "My name is Emily Harrington," she began, her voice clear and firm, "and I'm here to tell you the truth about Harrington Industries." For almost an hour, Emily spoke. She revealed the company's unethical practices, the dangerous working conditions, the illegal agreements. But she also spoke about hope, about the possibility of change, about a future in which companies could thrive without exploiting their workers or the environment. Alongside him, Jake and Sarah provided additional details, corroborating his story with documents and testimonies. One by one, the workers stepped forward to share their experiences. As Emily spoke, she could feel something changing in the air. The initial hostility of some reporters gave way to respectful attention. The workers, who initially viewed her with suspicion, now looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, like a wave, the applause began. Workers, reporters, even some executives who had joined the crowd, all applauding, some with tears in their eyes. Emily felt Jake squeeze her hand, and when she turned to look at him, she saw pride shining in his eyes. "You did it, Emily," he whispered. "You really did it." But before Emily could reply, a movement in the crowd caught her eye. Her father, Charles Harrington, was making his way towards her, his face an unreadable mask. Emily's heart raced. This was the moment she dreaded the most, the final confrontation with her father in front of everyone. Charles stopped a few steps away, his eyes scanning the scene in front of him. His daughter holding hands with a worker, surrounded by workers and journalists, all waiting to see what he would do. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other in silence. And then, to everyone's surprise, Charles Harrington did something no one expected. He smiled. "You're stronger than I've ever been, Emily," he said, his voice charged with an emotion Emily had never heard before. "And you're right. It's time we did things differently." With that, Charles turned to the crowd of reporters. "Harrington Industries has made mistakes," he announced. "Serious mistakes. And it's time we put those mistakes right. As of today, we are committing to a complete restructuring of our practices, and my daughter, Emily Harrington, will lead this process of change." Emily felt as if the world had stopped spinning. She looked at Jake, at Sarah, at the workers around her, all of whom seemed as shocked as she was. But as the reality of the moment set in, Emily felt a wave of determination grow inside her. This was only the beginning. There was a lot of work to be done, many changes to be implemented, but for the first time, she felt truly ready for the challenge. With Jake by her side and the support of her allies, Emily knew she could turn Harrington Industries into something everyone could be proud of. It was the start of a new era, not just for the company, but for herself. And as the sun set over the Harrington factory, casting a golden glow over the scene, Emily knew that no matter what the future held, she was exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months have passed since the day Emily Harrington stood up to her father and exposed the truth about Harrington Industries to the world. 6 months of intense change, constant challenges, and profound transformations, not just for the company, but for everyone involved. The morning sun poured through the windows of Emily's new office at Harrington Industries. It wasn't her father's intimidating office on the top floor, but a more accessible space in the heart of the factory, with glass walls that allowed her to see and be seen by the workers. Emily stood by the window, watching the movement of the factory below. The changes were visible even from there. Updated safety equipment, improved rest areas, happier and more determined faces among the workers. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. It was Jake smiling as he entered the room. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, leaning in to give her a soft kiss. Emily smiled, feeling the familiar wave of warmth that Jake's presence always brought her. "As ready as I can be," she replied. "I still can't believe we've come this far." Jake took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You made it happen, Emily. You changed everything." Emily shook her head. "We made it happen. All of us." The day that followed was a whirlwind of activity. Harrington Industries was holding its first public accountability event since the restructuring. Representatives of the press, shareholders, employees, and members of the community filled the company's large auditorium. Emily was backstage going over her notes one last time. Sarah, who had become an invaluable ally in recent months, approached with a tablet in hand. "The final figures are in," she said, handing Emily the tablet. "I think you'll like what you see." Emily examined the data, her eyes widening as she absorbed the information. Stable profits despite the initial restructuring costs. Employee satisfaction rates at an all-time high, a significant reduction in accidents at work, and surprisingly an increase in productivity. "That's incredible," Emily muttered, hardly believing her eyes. Sarah smiled proudly. "It's the result of your hard work, Emily, and of everyone who believed in you." Meanwhile, in the auditorium, Charles Harrington was taking to the stage to open the event. His appearance had changed over the last few months. He looked more tired, but also more human. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "6 months ago, my daughter, Emily Harrington, did something I never had the courage to do. She exposed the truth about our company, no matter the personal consequences." Charles paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "At first, I thought she was destroying everything we'd built, but now I see that she was saving the soul of Harrington Industries." A murmur went through the audience. Charles continued, "Today, I'm not here as a CEO, but as a proud father. It is with great honor that I pass the microphone to the new CEO of Harrington Industries, my daughter, Emily Harrington." The audience erupted in applause as Emily took the stage. She hugged her father briefly before taking her place at the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her. "Thank you, Dad," she began, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. "And thank you all for being here today." Emily took a deep breath before continuing. 6 months ago, we were on the edge of a precipice. Our unethical practices were not only harming our employees and the environment, but threatening the very future of Harrington Industries. She paused, her eyes meeting Jake's in the audience. He nodded encouragingly, and Emily felt a surge of strength run through her body. "Today, I'm here to show you that there is a better way, that it is possible to be a profitable and ethical company, that we can grow without exploiting our workers or destroying the planet." For almost an hour, Emily presented the results of the restructuring. She didn't hide the challenges they faced, the difficulties that still lay ahead, but she also highlighted the victories, the success stories, the lives that had been positively impacted by the changes. "But don't stop charging us," she concluded. "Don't stop questioning us, because that's how we grow, that's how we improve. Transparency isn't just a nice word for us, it's a daily commitment." When Emily finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Employees stood up, some with tears in their eyes. Journalists furiously took notes. Even the most skeptical shareholders seemed impressed. But for Emily, the most emotional moment came afterwards, when she came down from the stage and was immediately enveloped in a tight hug by her father. "I'm so proud of you, Emily," Charles whispered, his voice tinged with emotion. "You did what I never had the courage to do. You saved this company, and you saved me too." Emily felt hot tears running down her cheeks as she hugged her father back. For so long, she had craved his approval, his pride. And now, finally, she had it. Not for being who her father wanted her to be, but for truly being herself. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, handshakes, and animated conversations. Emily found herself surrounded by people who wanted to congratulate her, ask questions, offer suggestions. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the last guest had left, that Emily finally had a moment to breathe. She was back in her office, looking out of the window at the factory below, when she felt strong arms wrap around her from behind. "You were amazing today," Jake murmured, kissing her neck softly. Emily turned in his arms, smiling. "We were amazing. All of us." Jake studied her for a moment, his eyes full of love and admiration. "You know, when we met at that charity event, I could never have imagined that we'd be here today." Emily laughed softly. "You mean when you were sent to spy on me?" Jake had the decency to look embarrassed. "Yeah, well, things didn't go exactly to plan." "No," Emily agreed, pulling him closer. They turned out much better. They kissed, slowly and deeply, the world around them disappearing for a moment. When they broke apart, Emily looked into Jake's eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude for everything they had been through together. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake smiled, that smile that still made Emily's heart skip a beat. Now we keep fighting. We keep getting better. Together." Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions: hope, determination, love. "Together," she repeated. In that moment, looking at Jake, at the factory below, at the future that was opening up before them, Emily knew that she had found her place in the world. Not as the reluctant heiress she had once been, but as a leader committed to change, to justice, to a better future for all. And as the sun set over Harrington Industries, casting a golden glow over the city, Emily felt a peace she had never experienced before. The road ahead would still be challenging, full of obstacles and difficulties, but with Jake by her side, with the support of her family and allies, she was ready to face anything that came her way. Because now she knew the most important truth of all, that a single person acting with courage and conviction really can change the world. And Emily Harrington was just getting started. "Shall we go home?" Jake asked softly, entwining his fingers with hers. Emily smiled, feeling truly at home for the first time in her life. "Yes," she replied. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, they left the office, ready to face whatever the future held. Together. And so the story of Emily Harrington, the heiress who became a leader, the woman who dared to challenge the status quo and change the course of an entire industry, came not to an end, but to a new beginning. A beginning full of possibilities, hope, and the promise of a better future for everyone. If this story touched your heart, then don't forget to leave a like. Use the super thanks located just below the video to directly support the channel and help create more amazing content. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Now don't miss the next incredible story that's appearing on your screen. I greatly appreciate your support and hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching.